Somewhere in your kitchen right now, there's probably a jar of something alive. Yogurt, pickles, a sourdough starter you've been feeding for years, maybe a bottle of kombucha nobody's finished. None of that food is dead the way a can of soup is dead. It's packed with billions of living microbes, the same bacteria and yeast that turned milk into yogurt and cabbage into kimchi in the first place. So here's a question worth sitting with for a second. What if eating something crawling with microorganisms isn't a risk you tolerate for the flavor, but one of the best things you can do for your body? People have been asking some version of that question for thousands of years, long before anyone even knew bacteria existed. Fermented foods show up in nearly every culture on the planet. Cabbage packed in salt in Korea and Germany. Milk cultured into yogurt across the Balkans in the Middle East. Soybeans turned into miso in Japan. Grapes turned into wine thousands of years ago in the mountains of Georgia. Nobody set out to study microbiology when they invented any of that. They were solving a much simpler problem: how to keep food edible before refrigeration existed. The living microbes were just a side effect nobody could even see. But more than 100 years ago, one scientist looked at that accident and couldn't stop thinking about it. Have you ever wondered why a scientist who won a Nobel Prize decided a bowl of sour milk was the secret to a long life? His name was Elie Metchnikoff, and in the early 1900s, he became fixated on a strange pattern. Peasants in a corner of Bulgaria who ate sour milk almost every single day seemed to live unusually long lives. Metchnikoff proposed the bacteria in that soured milk were quietly fighting off other microbes deep in the gut. Microbes he believed were slowly poisoning the body and speeding up aging. By modern standards, his theory was crude. He got plenty of details wrong. But he planted an idea that never really went away: that some of the smallest living things you eat might change how long and how well you live. That idea sat around for most of the 20th century as a curiosity, more folklore than science. Then something happened to the food supply that made the question impossible to ignore. Modern food production got very good at keeping microbes out. Pasteurization, heavy processing, better hygiene, all of it made food safer, and also a lot more sterile than anything humans had eaten for most of history. And around the same time that shift was happening, doctors started noticing something else. Rates of allergies, asthma, and autoimmune disease were climbing fastest in exactly the countries eating the most processed, most sterile diets. Nobody thinks that's a coincidence anymore. There's a real scientific idea behind it, sometimes called the hygiene hypothesis. The notion that a modern diet stripped of live microbes might be quietly reshaping the immune system in ways that backfire. To understand why that matters, you have to zoom out and look at what's actually living inside a human gut. Your intestines are home to trillions of microorganisms, more individual cells than you have in your entire body. That community does a lot more than help digest lunch. It talks to your immune system constantly. It produces compounds that influence your blood sugar, your cholesterol, even your mood, through a direct line of communication running between the gut and the brain. So if the food you eat can reshape that community, even a little, the question stops being a fringe idea and starts being one of the more interesting open questions in modern nutrition. Here's where it gets more concrete. In carefully controlled trials, giving people concentrated doses of specific bacteria, the kind sold as probiotic supplements, has already been shown to nudge blood pressure and blood sugar in a healthier direction, at least in people who already had high blood pressure or diabetes. But a supplement capsule isn't really how humans have eaten microbes for most of history. Real fermented food is messier, less concentrated, and comes tangled up with everything else in a normal diet. Interestingly, not everything technically fermented actually counts. Bread is fermented by yeast, and so is coffee during processing, but baking and roasting kill off the microbes involved. So foods like that don't count as a source of live microbes at all. So a much bigger question was still open. Not whether a pill full of bacteria can move the needle in a lamp, but whether ordinary people, eating ordinary meals with yogurt or kimchi or a pickle on the side, show any measurable difference at all? Answering that question properly means you can't just study a few dozen volunteers in a lab for a few weeks. You need to look at how thousands of real people actually eat out in the real world and see whether the pattern holds up. That's exactly the kind of question that keeps this channel going, digging past the headlines and the supplement ads to find out what real, large-scale research actually shows once you follow it all the way to the data. If that's the kind of story you enjoy, real evidence quietly separating fact from wishful thinking, hit subscribe. We dig up a new one every week. Now, back to the part nobody had actually measured at scale, until now. So what happens when you actually look at tens of thousands of ordinary adults, not a lab experiment, just real life, and ask a simple question: do the ones eating more live microbes end up any healthier? There was already a hint of an answer sitting in earlier research on specific foods. People who eat yogurt regularly, for instance, tend to show a lower risk of high blood pressure and heart disease compared with people who barely touch it. One clinical trial gave healthy women about 1.5 servings of low-fat yogurt every day for several weeks. The women eating yogurt ended up with lower markers of inflammation than the ones eating a non-dairy alternative instead. Fermented vegetables and soy showed similar hints in other studies: lower blood pressure, better blood sugar control, even a lower risk of skin conditions like eczema in some groups. And in one striking experiment, splitting people into two groups, one eating a diet loaded with fiber, the other loaded with fermented foods, only the fermented food group saw their gut microbiome diversity increase and their inflammation markers drop over 10 weeks. Fiber is usually the nutrition world's golden child. Watching fermented food outperform it, even in one study, was the kind of result that makes researchers sit up. So the individual pieces of evidence were stacking up. What was still missing was the big picture. Not one food, not one small trial, but a real snapshot of how an entire population eats and whether that snapshot lines up with better health across the board. That's where a massive nationwide health survey comes in, the kind of project that tracks what real people eat alongside their blood pressure, their cholesterol, their blood sugar, year after year, for decades. It's one of the largest ongoing pictures of American health and diet that exists, built by asking tens of thousands of adults in detail exactly what they put on their plate. A team of researchers pulled decades of that data and did something nobody had really done before at this scale. They sorted thousands of individual foods by how many live microbes each one likely contained, from nearly sterile to absolutely packed with bacteria and yeast. Then they lined that up against the same blood pressure readings, cholesterol panels, and blood sugar tests already sitting in the survey data. Nearly 5,000 adults ended up in the analysis. So after sorting through years of data on tens of thousands of real people's actual diets, what did they actually find? The honest answer is mostly what you'd hope, but there was one specific number buried in the results that stood out from the rest. So did feeding your gut all those live bacteria actually move numbers that doctors care about, or did it turn out to be nothing? People who ate more of these live microbe foods showed a small but real dip in blood pressure, lower inflammation, lower blood sugar and insulin, a slightly smaller waistline, and higher levels of the protective form of cholesterol. When the researchers zoomed in on fermented foods specifically, yogurt, cultured dairy, refrigerated pickled vegetables, the same pattern showed up, and for blood pressure and that protected cholesterol, the effect looked even stronger. To make that concrete, the researchers modeled something simple. What happens if an adult swaps a good chunk of their processed food for the same amount of live microbe-rich alternatives, roughly a cup of yogurt, a piece of fruit, and a serving of vegetables? That one swap was linked to blood pressure dropping by a few points, and a waistline trimmed by somewhere between 1/2 inch and about 2 inches. It's not a miracle cure, and nobody's claiming yogurt replaces medication. But for a change this simple, sitting quietly on a grocery store shelf, that's a genuinely interesting result. Part of the explanation might come down to compounds these gut bacteria produce, byproducts called short-chain fatty acids, which seem to calm down cholesterol production in the liver and help release a hormone that keeps blood sugar and appetite in check. Now for the part any honest science channel has to include. This survey couldn't prove that the microbes themselves caused any of it. Everyone in the study was measured once, not followed for years. So it shows a real pattern, a genuine association, but not proof of cause and effect. People who eat more fermented food might simply take better care of themselves overall in ways the researchers couldn't fully separate out. Diet was also self-reported, based on what people remembered eating on a single day, which is never perfectly precise. So the honest headline isn't that fermented food is medicine. It's that a huge, careful look at real people's real diets keeps landing on the same modest, plausible signal that scientists have been chasing since a Russian biologist first got curious about sour milk over a century ago. Whether or not you ever read the paper behind it, the next time you spoon some yogurt into a bowl or drop a fork into a jar of kimchi, you'll know there's a surprisingly large pile of evidence quietly cheering you on.